Have you ever wondered what it would be like to farm on water, surrounded by towering temple pyramids and the constant hum of a bustling city? What secrets did the Aztecs discover that allowed them to feed an empire of over 200,000 people from gardens that literally floated on a lake? How did they manage to create one of the most sophisticated agricultural systems in human history without modern technology? And what would it actually feel like to wake up every day as one of the farmers who made this miracle possible? Tonight, we're embarking on a journey back to the heart of the Aztec Empire, to the great city of Tenochtitlan, where ingenuity met desperation and gave birth to the remarkable chinampas, the floating gardens that defied nature itself. We'll explore not just how they worked, but what it truly meant to live and toil in this aquatic paradise that was simultaneously one of humanity's greatest achievements and most demanding lifestyles. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're checking in from tonight and what time it is there. Are you settling in for the evening, or perhaps starting your day with some calming historical exploration? If you truly enjoy these stories about the forgotten details of history, the kind that help us understand how our ancestors lived, worked, and survived, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. Your support means the world to me, and I want you to know that you're an important part of our growing community of history enthusiasts who find peace in the past. Feel free to comment below about what historical topic you'd like to explore next, or just check in and let me know you're here. I read every single comment, and your suggestions often inspire our next journey through time. Thank you for your continued support. It truly makes all the difference. Now, if you'd like, this might be a good time to turn down the lights, maybe put on a fan for some gentle background noise, and settle in for our exploration of one of history's most fascinating civilizations. Let's step back in time together, to a world where the line between land and water blurred, and where survival depended on mastering the delicate balance of nature itself. Why you wouldn't last a day as an Aztec farmer. Picture this. It's still dark, perhaps 4 in the morning, and you're awakening not to the sound of an alarm clock, but to the gentle lapping of lake water against the edges of your artificial island. You're not in a house with solid foundations, but in a modest adobe structure built on what is essentially a floating garden, one of thousands scattered across the vast lake. Texcoco. The air is cool and humid, carrying the earthy scent of rich soil mixed with the distinct smell of lake water, fish, and the countless plants that make up your world. As you stretch and prepare for the day ahead, you can already feel the subtle movement beneath your feet. Your entire world sways gently, almost imperceptibly, with the rhythm of the lake. This is your reality as a chinampero, a farmer of the floating gardens, and this gentle motion will be your constant companion for every moment of your life. For someone from our modern world, this constant, subtle movement would be deeply unsettling. But for you, it's as natural as breathing. You rise before dawn, not by choice, but by necessity. The work ahead of you cannot wait for the sun, and the cooler morning hours are precious. Your first task is to check the water levels around your chinampa, your floating garden plot. During the night, the water may have risen or fallen, and you need to ensure that your carefully constructed island maintains its delicate balance. Too much water, and your crops will drown. Too little, and they'll wither in the intense Mexican sun that will soon dominate the sky. Moving carefully in the dim pre-dawn light, you wade into the shallow water that surrounds your plot. The lake bottom beneath your feet is soft and muddy, occasionally giving way to deeper pockets that can catch you off guard. You're checking the intricate network of wooden stakes and woven reed barriers that hold your island together. These aren't just simple boundaries. They're complex engineering marvels that must be constantly maintained, repaired, and adjusted. The stakes, driven deep into the lake bed, are made from mahoto trees, chosen specifically because they continue to grow even after being cut and planted. Over time, these living stakes will develop into a natural fence of trees, their roots intertwining to create an increasingly stable foundation for your garden. But that's a process that takes years, and right now, you must rely on the careful weaving of reeds and the constant addition of mud and plant matter to keep your island intact. As the first hints of dawn begin to color the eastern sky, you can see the vast expanse of Lake Texcoco stretching in all directions. The lake is not empty. It's a bustling highway of canoes, each one carrying people, goods, and materials to and from the great city of Tenochtitlan. The gentle sound of paddles cutting through water creates a constant, rhythmic backdrop to your daily life. You might see fishermen checking their nets, merchants transporting goods, or other farmers like yourself heading to their own floating plots. Your breakfast is simple but nourishing, typically consisting of a tole, a warm drink made from ground maize, and perhaps some fish caught from the lake or small birds trapped in the reed beds. There's no time for elaborate meals. The work of maintaining a floating garden demands nearly every daylight hour. As you eat, you're already planning your day, thinking about which sections of your plot need attention, which crops are ready for harvest, and what repairs might be needed. The physical demands of being a chinampero would be overwhelming for most modern people. Every single thing you need for your garden must be transported by canoe. Soil, seeds, water for irrigation, tools, building materials, everything. There are no roads to your floating farm, no convenient stores nearby, no modern conveniences whatsoever. If you need fresh soil to build up a section of your plot, you must paddle to the shoreline, dig it up, load it into your canoe, and transport it back to your island. A single trip might take hours, and you'll need dozens of such trips to maintain your garden properly. The soil itself is not just any earth. The most prized soil comes from the bottom of the lake, rich with organic matter and nutrients. To harvest this precious resource, you must wade into deeper water, sometimes up to your chest, and use special tools to scrape the nutrient-rich mud from the lake floor. This is back-breaking work, performed while standing in water, often for hours at a time. Your hands become permanently stained with mud, your back aches constantly, and the risk of injury from hidden obstacles in the murky water is ever present. Building and maintaining the actual structure of your chinampa is like being a constant gardener, engineer, and laborer all at once. You must weave together reeds and rushes to create the framework of your island, then carefully add layers of mud, plant matter, and organic debris to build up the surface. This isn't done once, it's an ongoing process. The constant action of the water, the weight of your crops, and the natural settling of organic matter means that your island is constantly changing, constantly requiring adjustment and repair. The crops you grow are not chosen for your personal preference, but for their ability to thrive in this unique environment and their value in the marketplace. Maize, beans, squash, tomatoes, flowers, and various herbs each have their own specific requirements and growing seasons. You must be an expert in the needs of dozens of different plants, knowing exactly when to plant, when to harvest, and how to maximize your yield in the limited space available. Water management is perhaps the most crucial and challenging aspect of your daily life. Although you're surrounded by water, not all of it is suitable for your crops. Lake Texcoco has areas of fresh water and areas of salt water, and knowing the difference can mean the difference between a successful harvest and complete crop failure. You must carefully channel fresh water from springs and streams to your plots, while preventing the saltier lake water from contaminating your soil. The irrigation system you maintain is incredibly sophisticated, involving a network of small channels, dams, and diversions that would challenge a modern engineer. You must constantly monitor water levels, adjust the flow of water to different parts of your plot, and ensure that drainage is adequate to prevent waterlogging. This requires not just physical labor, but a deep understanding of hydraulics, soil science, and plant biology that takes years to master. Your day is structured around the natural rhythms of the lake and the demands of your crops. The morning hours are spent checking water levels and repairing any damage that might have occurred overnight. The middle of the day, when the sun is most intense, is often devoted to harvesting and processing crops, work that must be done quickly to prevent spoilage. The afternoon is typically spent on maintenance tasks, building up soil, repairing barriers, and preparing for the next day's work. But you're not working alone in this vast lake. The entire Chinampa system is a community effort, with hundreds of families each maintaining their own plots while cooperating on larger projects. The channels between the islands must be kept clear for navigation. Major repairs might require the cooperation of multiple families, and the complex system of water management affects everyone. Social harmony is not just desirable, it's essential for survival. The tools you use are simple but effective, crafted from materials available in your environment. Wooden digging sticks for planting, red baskets for carrying soil and harvests, stone knives for cutting, and various implements made from bone, wood, and obsidian. There's no metal in your toolkit, no mechanized equipment, no modern fertilizers or pesticides. Everything depends on your knowledge, your skill, and your willingness to work from dawn to dusk in challenging conditions. Weather is a constant concern and a constant enemy. Too much rain can wash away soil and damage your carefully constructed barriers. Too little rain can lower water levels and stress your crops. Storms can destroy months of work in a single night, washing away soil, uprooting plants, and damaging the structural integrity of your island. You have no weather forecasts, no early warning systems, only your experience and your ability to read the signs in the sky and the behavior of the lake. The harvest season brings its own unique challenges. Your crops must be harvested at exactly the right time and transported immediately to market before they spoil. This means long days spent cutting, gathering, and loading produce into canoes, then paddling to the great market of Tlatelolco in Tenochtitlan. You must compete with hundreds of other farmers for the attention of buyers, and any delay or mistake can mean the loss of your entire season's work. Living on a floating garden means that your entire existence is at the mercy of the lake. A sudden storm can destroy your home as well as your crops. Changes in water level can leave your island stranded or completely submerged. The constant humidity affects everything you own, from your clothing to your tools to your food stores. Nothing stays dry, nothing stays exactly where you put it, and the gentle but constant motion of your floating world affects everything you do. Yet despite these challenges, you're part of one of the most sophisticated agricultural systems ever developed. Your floating gardens will help feed an empire, support a population larger than most European cities of the time, and create a level of agricultural productivity that won't be matched in the Americas for centuries. You're not just a farmer, you're an engineer, a scientist, and a master of one of humanity's most remarkable achievements. The social structure of Chinampa farming is complex and hierarchical. Not all farmers own their plots. Many work as laborers for wealthier families who own multiple islands. The most skilled chinampas, those who have mastered the intricate balance of soil, water, and crops, are highly respected and well compensated. But even the most successful farmers live lives of constant labor and uncertainty, always one bad season or major storm away from disaster. Your day ends as it began, in the soft light of dawn or dusk, with the gentle sound of water lapping against your island. But unlike the peaceful image this might conjure, your reality is one of constant vigilance, endless physical labor, and the perpetual challenge of maintaining a delicate balance between human needs and natural forces. You fall asleep to the same gentle swaying that woke you, knowing that tomorrow will bring another day of the same demanding work that defines your existence. The seasonal variations in your life as a chinampero add another layer of complexity to an already demanding existence. During the dry season, water levels drop significantly, requiring you to adjust your irrigation systems almost daily. You must dig deeper channels to reach the receding waterline, reinforce barriers that become exposed as the lake shrinks, and carefully monitor your crops for signs of water stress. The dry season winds can be particularly brutal, whipping across the exposed lake bed and threatening to tear apart the delicate structures you've spent months building. The rainy season brings its own unique challenges that test your skills and endurance in different ways. Torrential downpours can dump inches of water onto your floating garden in a matter of hours, threatening to swamp your carefully balanced island and drown your crops. You must work quickly during storms to dig drainage channels, reinforce weak spots in your barriers, and sometimes even bail water by hand to prevent your entire season's work from being destroyed. The sound of heavy rain on the lake creates a deafening roar that makes communication nearly impossible, forcing you to work alone in conditions that would send most modern people running for shelter. The threat of flooding extends beyond just too much water on your chinampa. The lake itself can rise dramatically during the rainy season, and if you haven't correctly calculated the height of your island, you might wake up one morning to find your entire plot submerged beneath several feet of water. This miscalculation can mean the loss of everything: your crops, your home, and months of hard work, all gone in a single night of heavy rain. The insects that thrive in the lake environment are a constant source of torment that you can never escape. Mosquitoes swarm in clouds so thick they can obscure your vision, biting exposed skin relentlessly and making sleep nearly impossible during certain times of year. The constant buzzing creates a maddening soundtrack to your work, and the itching from hundreds of bites becomes so familiar that you barely notice it anymore. Beyond the discomfort, these insects carry diseases that can sweep through chinampa communities, leaving families devastated and labor forces depleted. Water snakes are another reality of your aquatic existence that keeps you constantly alert. While most are harmless, some species are venomous, and distinguishing between them in murky water while you're working is a skill that takes years to develop. You've learned to move carefully through the shallows, always aware that a snake might be hiding in the reeds or coiled beneath the surface where you're about to step. The fear never entirely goes away. It just becomes part of the background anxiety that defines your daily life. The economic pressures you face as a chinampero are relentless and unforgiving. You must produce enough surplus crops to pay tribute to your local lord, taxes to the empire, and offerings to the temples, all while feeding your own family and setting aside seed for the next planting season. A single bad harvest can cascade into years of debt and obligation that bind you and your children to servitude. The calculations you must constantly perform in your head, weighing yields against obligations, planning months in advance for tribute payments. Managing the complex economics of survival require mathematical skills that would challenge many modern people. The social hierarchy within the chinampa farming community adds another dimension to your daily struggles. The most productive plots, those closest to freshwater sources and in the most protected locations, are controlled by families who have held them for generations. As a relatively new farmer or one working a marginal plot, you must work twice as hard to achieve half the results of more fortunate neighbors. This inequality is accepted as natural, part of the divine order that structures all Aztec society, but it doesn't make your burden any lighter. The knowledge required to be a successful chinampero extends far beyond simple farming skills. You must be an expert meteorologist, reading subtle signs in the sky, the behavior of birds and insects, and the feel of the wind to predict weather changes that could affect your crops. You need to understand the complex seasonal patterns of the lake, knowing when water levels will rise and fall, when certain currents will shift, and when dangerous storms are most likely to occur. This knowledge isn't written in books. It's passed down through generations and learned through years of careful observation and sometimes painful experience. Your relationship with water is fundamentally different from that of people who farm on solid ground. Water is simultaneously your greatest ally and your most dangerous enemy. It provides the foundation for your entire way of life, transports your goods, irrigates your crops, and supplies fish and other foods to supplement your diet. But it can also destroy everything you've built in moments, whether through flooding, erosion, or simply the gradual dissolution of your carefully constructed island. You develop an almost supernatural sensitivity to water, its moods, its movements, its potential for both creation and destruction. The tools you maintain are precious possessions that can mean the difference between success and failure. A well-crafted digging stick, properly seasoned and shaped, can last for years and make your work significantly easier. A sturdy canoe, carefully hollowed from a single log and sealed with natural resins, is an investment that represents months of labor or significant trade goods. The loss or damage of essential tools can be catastrophic, setting you back weeks or even seasons in your work schedule. You learn to care for your tools with an attention to detail that borders on obsessive, because you know that your survival depends on them. The diet of a chinampero family reflects both the abundance and the monotony of your aquatic environment. Maize forms the foundation of nearly every meal, supplemented by beans, squash, and whatever vegetables are currently in season from your plot. Fish from the lake provide protein, along with occasional waterfowl or small game trapped in the reed beds. During harvest season, when crops are plentiful, you eat relatively well, but during the lean months before the harvest, meals become sparse and repetitive. The constant physical labor you perform requires enormous amounts of calories, and chronic hunger is a familiar companion during difficult periods. The spiritual aspects of chinampa farming permeate every aspect of your life in ways that are difficult for modern people to comprehend. Every stage of the agricultural cycle is accompanied by specific rituals and offerings. Before planting, you must make offerings to Tlaloc, the rain god, asking for favorable weather and abundant water. During the growing season, you perform ceremonies to protect your crops from pests and disease. At harvest time, you give thanks to the gods and set aside a portion of your yield for temple offerings. These aren't quaint customs or optional practices. They're essential elements of farming that are as important as proper irrigation or soil management. The lake itself is considered a sacred entity, not just a body of water, but a living presence that must be respected and appeased. You've learned to read omens in the behavior of the lake, unusual wave patterns, strange sounds, changes in watercolor, all of which might indicate divine displeasure or impending disaster. When the lake is calm and productive, you feel the favor of the gods. When it becomes turbulent or dangerous, you know that something has offended the divine powers and appropriate offerings must be made. The physical toll of chinampiro life shows clearly on your body by the time you reach middle age. Your hands are gnarled and permanently stained with mud, the skin cracked and calloused from constant immersion in water. Your back is bent from years of stooping and lifting, and your joints ache constantly from the dampness and repetitive motions. Many chinamperos develop chronic respiratory problems from breathing the humid air filled with spores and organic matter. Yet this physical deterioration is accepted as the natural price of your profession, the visible evidence of a life spent in service to both your family and your empire. This is the reality that most people could never endure, the daily life of those who created and maintained one of the world's most remarkable agricultural systems. It's a life that required not just physical strength and endurance, but intelligence, creativity, and an intimate understanding of the natural world that few modern people possess. The floating gardens of the Aztecs were not just a farming technique. They were a way of life that shaped every aspect of human existence for those who chose to master the challenge of growing food on water. The rise of Tlacaelel, the architect of an empire built on water. In the annals of Aztec history, few figures loom as large or as mysterious as Tlacaelel, a man whose vision and political genius would transform not just the destiny of the Aztec people, but the very landscape of central Mexico itself. While most people know the names of Aztec emperors like Moctezuma, it was Tlacaelel who served as the power behind the throne for decades, and it was his revolutionary understanding of agriculture, engineering, and empire building that would make the floating gardens not just possible, but essential to Aztec survival. Born around 1397 in the still modest city of Tenochtitlan, Tlacaelel came of age during one of the most precarious periods in Aztec history. The Aztecs, or Mexica as they called themselves, were relatively recent arrivals to the Valley of Mexico. Having settled on a swampy island in Lake Texcoco less than a century before his birth, they were vassals to the powerful Teutonic Empire, forced to pay tribute and lacking the military strength to challenge their overlords. The situation was desperate, and young Tlacaelel would witness firsthand the humiliations and hardships that came with being a subject people. The turning point came in 1428, when Tlacaelel was in his early 30s and serving as a principal advisor to his nephew, Itzcoatl, who had recently become the Aztec ruler. The Tepaneca Empire was fragmenting due to internal conflicts, and Tlacaelel saw an opportunity that others missed. While many of his contemporaries counseled caution, fearing the consequences of rebellion, Tlacaelel argued for bold action. He understood something that would prove to be his greatest insight, that the Aztecs' island location, which many saw as a disadvantage, could actually be turned into their greatest strength. The geography of the Valley of Mexico in the 5th-10th century was dramatically different from today. Lake Texcoco was just one of 5 interconnected lakes that covered much of the valley floor, creating a vast aquatic landscape that presented both opportunities and challenges. Most civilizations built their cities on solid ground, but Tlacaelel envisioned something different. A city that would thrive precisely because it was built on water. His revolutionary thinking began with a simple observation. While armies could march across land to attack cities, they would struggle to assault a well-fortified island. The water that surrounded Tenochtitlan wasn't just a barrier, it was a moat that could be controlled, manipulated, and used as both a defense and a highway. But Tlacaelel's vision went far beyond military strategy. He understood that the same water that could protect the city could also feed it. if the Aztecs could master the art of aquatic agriculture. The chinampa system did not spring into existence overnight. Archaeological evidence suggests that various forms of raised field agriculture had been practiced in the Valley of Mexico for centuries before the Aztecs arrived. However, it was under Tlacaelel's guidance that these scattered farming techniques were systematized, expanded, and integrated into a comprehensive vision of empire. He didn't just want to improve Aztec agriculture. He wanted to create a food production system that could support not just a city, but a growing empire. Tlacaelel's approach to the chinampa system was methodical and strategic. He began by commissioning detailed surveys of the lake system, sending teams of engineers and farmers to map water depths, identify areas with the best soil, and locate the springs that provided fresh water. This wasn't casual exploration. It was systematic intelligence gathering that would inform decades of construction and expansion. The early chinampa projects under Tlacaelel's direction were experimental and often failed. The first floating gardens were crude affairs, little more than red platforms covered with mud that quickly sank or fell apart in storms. But Tlacaelel understood that failure was part of the process. He established workshops where master craftsmen could develop better techniques for weaving reeds, selecting the right types of wood for stakes, and creating more stable foundations. One of Tlacaelel's most important innovations was the creation of a specialized class of chinampa engineers. These weren't just farmers who happened to work on floating gardens. They were skilled professionals who understood hydraulics, soil science, and plant biology. Tlacaelel established schools where these techniques could be taught and passed down, ensuring that knowledge wouldn't be lost when individual experts died. The social organization of the chinampa system also bears Tlacaelel's stamp. Rather than allowing the floating gardens to develop haphazardly, he created a carefully planned system of land grants and responsibilities. Families were assigned specific plots based on their skills and reliability, but they were also required to contribute labor to community projects like canal maintenance and major construction efforts. This wasn't just efficient, it was politically brilliant, creating a system where the success of individual families was tied to the success of the empire as a whole. Tlacaelel's vision extended beyond mere food production. He understood that the chinampa system could be used to grow more than just basic crops. Under his direction, specialized floating gardens were created for growing flowers, herbs, and other luxury items that could be traded throughout Mesoamerica. These high-value crops provided the economic foundation for Aztec expansion, generating the wealth needed to support professional armies and an increasingly complex government. The integration of the chinampa system with Aztec military strategy was perhaps Tlacaelel's most brilliant insight. The floating gardens didn't just feed the army, they were part of the army's tactical advantage. The network of canals that connected the gardens also served as a transportation system that allowed Aztec forces to move quickly and quietly throughout the lake system. Enemy armies approaching Tenochtitlan would find themselves facing not just the city's defenses, but a complex aquatic maze that the Aztecs knew intimately. Tlacaelel's political acumen was evident in how he handled the expansion of the chinampa system. Rather than simply ordering the creation of new floating gardens, he created incentives that made people want to participate. Successful chinampa farmers were granted higher social status and reduced tribute obligations. Communities that contributed to major canal projects received preferential treatment in trade negotiations. This wasn't just effective policy, it was masterful psychology that turned potential resistance into enthusiastic cooperation. The technical challenges of expanding the chinam system were enormous, and Tlacaelel's solutions reveal his understanding of both engineering and human nature. The problem of maintaining water quality in an increasingly crowded lake system required the creation of sophisticated filtration and circulation systems. Tlacaelel directed the construction of artificial islands, specifically designed to serve as settling ponds, where debris could be removed from the water before it reached the growing areas. The logistical challenges were equally complex. As the chinampa system expanded, it became necessary to coordinate the activities of thousands of farmers working on hundreds of individual plots. Tlacaelel created a bureaucratic system that could manage everything from seed distribution to harvest scheduling to canal maintenance. This wasn't just administration, it was the creation of one of the world's most sophisticated agricultural management systems. Tlacaelel's influence on the chinampa system extended to its most minute details. He was personally involved in decisions about which varieties of maize to plant, how to optimize the spacing of crops, and even the design of the tools used by farmers. This attention to detail reflected his understanding that the success of the empire depended on the success of every individual floating garden. The expansion of Tenochtitlan under Tlachtli's guidance was intimately connected to the growth of the chinampa system. As the city's population grew, more floating gardens were needed to feed it. But as more gardens were created, they required more workers who needed more housing, which meant the city had to expand further. This created a positive feedback loop that drove both urban growth and agricultural development. Tlachtli's vision also included the integration of the chinampa system with other aspects of Aztec civilization. The floating gardens provided not just food, but also materials for construction, medicine, and religious ceremonies. The flowers grown on specialized chinampas were essential for the elaborate religious festivals that legitimized Aztec rule. The herbs and medicinal plants grown in the floating gardens supported a sophisticated medical system that attracted patients from throughout Mesoamerica. The environmental impact of the chinampa system was something that Tlacaelel clearly understood, even if he wouldn't have used modern terminology to describe it. The floating gardens created artificial wetlands that supported diverse ecosystems of fish, birds, and aquatic plants. This biodiversity wasn't just aesthetically pleasing, it was economically valuable, providing additional sources of food and materials for the growing empire. One of the most remarkable aspects of Tlacaelel's management of the chinampa system was his ability to balance competing interests. The floating gardens required huge amounts of labor, but they also needed to be profitable enough to support that labor force. The system had to be productive enough to feed the empire, but flexible enough to adapt to changing conditions. The gardens had to be individually managed by skilled farmers, but also coordinated as part of a larger system. Tlacaelel's later years were marked by the continued expansion and refinement of the chinampa system, even as he aged and took on more ceremonial roles. He continued to involve himself in the technical details of floating garden construction. His personal notebooks, some of which survived the Spanish conquest, reveal a man who never stopped thinking about ways to improve the system he had created. The legacy of Tlacaelel's vision extended far beyond his own lifetime. The chinampa system he helped create would support the Aztec Empire for over a century, feeding a population that peaked at around 200,000 people in Tenochtitlan alone. The techniques he developed were so effective that they continued to be used in modified form well into the colonial period and beyond. Perhaps most remarkably, Tlachtli's understanding of the relationship between agriculture, politics, and empire building was so sophisticated that it rivals the insights of modern development theorists. He understood that sustainable agriculture required not just technical knowledge, but also social organization, economic incentives, and political stability. His chinampa system was not just a farming technique. It was a comprehensive approach to civilization that integrated environmental management, social organization, and economic development. The story of Tlacaelel and the floating gardens is ultimately a story about vision and persistence. He saw possibilities that others missed, understood connections that others ignored, and had the political skill to turn his ideas into reality. His greatest achievement was not just creating a successful agricultural system, but creating a system that could adapt, grow, and sustain itself across generations. When Spanish conquistadors first saw the chinampa system in operation, they were amazed by its sophistication and productivity. They described floating gardens that seemed to extend to the horizon, producing crops year-round in quantities that European agriculture couldn't match. What they were seeing was the culmination of Tlacaelel's vision, a testament to what could be achieved when human ingenuity, natural resources, and political will were brought together in service of a common goal. Tlacaelel's understanding of power extended beyond military might and agricultural productivity to encompass the psychological and cultural dimensions of empire building. He recognized that the chinampa system could serve as a powerful symbol of Aztec ingenuity and divine favor, demonstrating to both subjects and enemies that the Mexica people possessed knowledge and capabilities that set them apart from other nations. The floating gardens became part of the Aztec origin story, woven into religious narratives that portrayed the empire as destined for greatness by the gods themselves. The administrative innovations that Tlacaelel introduced to manage the expanding chinampa system reveal his genius for organization and his understanding of human motivation. He created a complex hierarchy of inspectors, overseers, and technical advisors who could monitor the productivity of individual plots while also coordinating the larger system. These officials weren't just bureaucrats collecting tribute. They were skilled agriculturalists who could provide advice, mediate disputes, and identify problems before they became crises. This administrative structure created a feedback loop where information flowed both up and down the hierarchy, allowing for rapid adaptation to changing conditions. The integration of the chinampa system with Aztec religious life was another aspect of Tlacaelel's comprehensive vision. He understood that the success of the floating gardens depended not just on technical knowledge and hard work, but on the psychological commitment of thousands of farmers who needed to believe that their labor served a higher purpose. Tlacaelel worked with the priesthood to develop elaborate ceremonies that celebrated the agricultural cycle, turning the mundane work of farming into sacred acts that connected individual farmers with the cosmic order. The planting and harvest seasons were marked by festivals that brought entire communities together, reinforcing social bonds while also serving as opportunities to share knowledge and recognize exceptional achievement. The economic policies that Tlacaelel implemented to support the chinampa system were remarkably sophisticated, revealing an understanding of markets and incentives that would impress modern economists. He established guaranteed prices for certain staple crops, ensuring that farmers could plan their production with some confidence about future returns. He created a system of agricultural credit that allowed farmers to borrow seeds, tools, and even labor during difficult periods, with repayment terms that were structured to account for the uncertainties of agricultural production. These policies helped stabilize food supplies while also encouraging farmers to invest in improvements to their chinampas. Tlacaelel's personal involvement in the technical details of chinampa construction and management never wavered. Even as he aged and took on more ceremonial responsibilities, historical accounts describe him inspecting floating gardens well into his 70s, questioning farmers about their techniques, and proposing improvements based on his own observations. This hands-on approach wasn't just about maintaining quality control. It was a demonstration that even the most powerful figures in the empire understood that agricultural productivity was the foundation of everything else. His example inspired other nobles to take an active interest in agricultural innovation, creating a culture where improving farming techniques was seen as worthy of the highest levels of attention. The challenges of scaling up the chinampa system from a local farming technique to the agricultural foundation of an empire were enormous. And Tlacaelel's solutions revealed both his technical understanding and his political skills. The expansion of the floating gardens required coordinating the activities of thousands of workers, managing the distribution of resources across a vast area, and maintaining quality standards as production increased. Tlacaelel created training programs that could produce skilled chinampa builders and farmers at the scale needed to support rapid expansion. He established quality control systems that identified and corrected problems before they could spread. He developed logistics networks that could move materials and products efficiently across the lake system. The diplomatic aspects of Tlacaelel's agricultural program are often overlooked, but were crucial to its success. Many of the lands surrounding Lake Texcoco were controlled by other city-states, and the expansion of the chinampa system sometimes encroached on territories or water sources that were disputed. Tlacaelel used a combination of negotiation, intimidation, and strategic marriages to secure the access to resources that the growing system needed. He understood that agricultural productivity was ultimately a form of power that could be used in diplomatic negotiations, offering food security to allies while threatening to withhold it from enemies. The environmental wisdom embedded in Tlacaelel's approach to the chinampa system is remarkable when examined from a modern perspective. He understood that the long-term productivity of the floating gardens depended on maintaining the health of the entire lake ecosystem. Regulations were established to prevent overfishing, control pollution, and maintain the water quality needed for agriculture. Areas of the lake were set aside as reserves where aquatic plants and animals could reproduce without human interference, ensuring sustainable harvests over time. This holistic approach to environmental management was centuries ahead of its time and contributed to the system's ability to remain productive over many generations. Tlacaelel's influence on the physical form of Tenochtitlan itself was profound, as he envisioned a city that would be inseparable from its agricultural foundation. The urban plan that emerged under his guidance integrated residential areas, temples, markets, and floating gardens into a seamless whole where the boundaries between city and countryside were deliberately blurred. Canals served simultaneously as transportation routes, defensive barriers, and irrigation channels. Open spaces within the city were designed to serve as emergency food production areas during sieges. The entire urban landscape was conceived as a giant machine for converting water and sunlight into food and power. The legacy of Tlacaelel's vision for record-keeping and documentation helped preserve knowledge about chinampa techniques for future generations. He established systems for recording agricultural data, tracking yields, monitoring water levels, and documenting successful innovations. While the Aztecs didn't have alphabetic writing, they developed sophisticated pictographic records that could convey complex technical information. These documents served as training materials, planning tools, and historical records that allowed each generation to build on the knowledge of their predecessors. The military applications of Tlacaelel's agricultural innovations extended beyond simply feeding armies. The floating gardens could be quickly converted into defensive positions during attacks, with farmers who knew the lake intimately serving as guides for Aztec warriors. The network of canals that served the chinampas also functioned as a defensive maze that invading forces would struggle to navigate. The stakes and barriers used in chinampa construction could be rapidly repurposed as military obstacles. Chinampa understood that the line between agricultural infrastructure and military defense was fluid, and he designed systems that could serve both purposes. The succession planning that Tlacaelel implemented ensured that his vision for the Chinampa system would outlive him. He identified and mentored younger administrators who shared his understanding of the system's importance, gradually transferring authority while maintaining oversight to ensure continuity. He established institutions rather than relying on individual leadership, creating structures that could function effectively even when specific leaders changed. This focus on institutional continuity helps explain why the chinampa system continued to thrive for decades after Tlacaelel's death. The educational reforms that Tlacaelel championed included mandatory training in agricultural techniques for all young nobles, ensuring that the elite class understood the foundation of their power. This wasn't just theoretical education, but practical training that required noble youth to work alongside common farmers, learning through direct experience the challenges and techniques of chinampa agriculture. This educational approach created a leadership class that understood agricultural realities and could make informed decisions about policies affecting food production. Tlacaelel's approach to technological innovation in the chinampa system reveals a sophisticated understanding of how knowledge advances. He encouraged experimentation by protecting farmers who tried new techniques from punishment if their experiments failed. He created mechanisms for sharing successful innovations across the entire system, ensuring that improvements discovered on one chinampa could quickly spread to others. He established prizes and honors for farmers who developed significant improvements, creating incentives for continuous innovation. This systematic approach to agricultural research and development was centuries ahead of its time. The philosophical dimensions of Tlacaelel's vision for the chinampa system reflected deeper Aztec beliefs about the relationship between humans and nature. He saw the floating gardens not as a conquest of nature, but as a partnership with it, where human intelligence and effort could work with natural processes to create something greater than either could achieve alone. This worldview shaped policies that emphasized sustainability, respected natural cycles, and sought to enhance rather than replace natural productivity. The success of the chinampa system validated this philosophical approach, demonstrating that working with nature could be more productive than trying to dominate it. The floating gardens of the Aztecs were more than just an agricultural technique. They were the foundation of a civilization, and Tlacaelel was the architect who made it all possible. The mystery of the sunken gardens, archaeological discoveries beneath Lake Texcoco. In the depths of what was once the Great Lake Texcoco, beneath layers of sediment and centuries of urban development, lies one of archaeology's most intriguing mysteries. Modern researchers have discovered the remains of chinampa systems that challenge everything we thought we knew about Aztec agriculture, revealing evidence of techniques so advanced that we're still trying to understand how they worked. These submerged gardens tell a story of innovation that goes far beyond the traditional narrative of floating agriculture, suggesting that the Aztecs developed methods of food production that were not just sophisticated, but revolutionary in ways that modern science is only beginning to appreciate. The rediscovery of these ancient agricultural systems began in the 1960s, when urban expansion around Mexico City required extensive archaeological surveys. As construction crews dug foundations for new buildings, they began uncovering strange formations in the dried lake bed that didn't match any known architectural patterns. These weren't the remains of temples or palaces, but rather intricate networks of channels, raised platforms, and water control structures that seemed to extend for miles beneath the modern city. The first archaeologists to examine these formations were puzzled by what they found. The conventional understanding of chinampa agriculture suggested that these floating gardens were relatively simple constructions, essentially rafts of reeds and mud that could be moved around the lake as needed. However, the archaeological evidence told a very different story. The structures beneath Mexico City were permanent, sophisticated, and integrated into complex hydraulic systems that demonstrated a level of engineering expertise that rivaled anything found in the ancient world. Dr. Teresa Rojas Rabiela, one of the leading researchers in this field, spent decades mapping these submerged agricultural systems. Her work revealed that the Aztecs had created not just floating gardens, but an entire artificial landscape that transformed the ecology of the lake system. The chinampas weren't simply placed randomly in the water. They were part of a carefully planned network that controlled water flow, managed soil nutrients, and created microclimates that could support different types of crops. The most mysterious aspect of these discoveries involves the depth at which some of these agricultural structures were found. Traditional chinampa systems were designed to float on or near the surface of the lake, but archaeologists have found evidence of raised field agriculture at depths that would have required the fields to be completely submerged. This suggests that the Aztecs developed techniques for underwater agriculture that we don't fully understand, possibly involving air pockets, specialized drainage systems, or other methods that allowed plants to grow beneath the water's surface. The construction techniques revealed by these archaeological investigations are far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The foundations of the chinampas weren't just piles of mud and reeds, but carefully engineered structures that included stone footings, drainage systems, and what appeared to be waterlocks that could control the flow of water between different sections of the agricultural system. These weren't simple farming plots. They were complex engineering projects that required advanced knowledge of hydraulics, soil science, and plant biology. One of the most intriguing discoveries involves the presence of what archaeologists call fossil soils within the chinampa structures. These are layers of extremely fertile earth that don't match the natural soil composition of the lake bed, suggesting that the Aztecs were importing soil from other regions or had developed techniques for creating artificial soil mixtures. Chemical analysis of these soils reveals trace elements and nutrient compositions that would have been ideal for specific types of crops, indicating that the Aztecs weren't just practicing agriculture, they were practicing precision agriculture centuries before the term was invented. The water management systems discovered in these submerged gardens are perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the archaeological findings. The Aztecs created an intricate network of channels, dams, and reservoirs that could regulate water levels with incredible precision. Some of these structures appear to have been designed to create different water temperatures in different parts of the system, possibly to extend growing seasons or allow for the cultivation of plants that normally wouldn't thrive in the lake's climate. The mystery deepens when we consider the scale of these operations. Aerial photography and ground-penetrating radar have revealed that the chinampa systems extended far beyond what Spanish chroniclers described. The agricultural network may have covered over 9,000 hectares, making it one of the largest intensive agricultural systems in the pre-Columbian Americas. This wasn't just a way of growing food, it was a complete transformation of the landscape that turned a lake into one of the most productive agricultural regions in the world. The discovery of specialized structures within the chinampa system has added new dimensions to our understanding of Aztec agriculture. Archaeologists have found evidence of what appear to be nurseries, where young plants were started before being transplanted to the main growing areas. There are also structures that seem to have been used for processing and storing crops, suggesting that the floating gardens weren't just places where food was grown, but complex agricultural facilities that handled every aspect of food production. The botanical evidence from these sites is equally fascinating. Seed and pollen analysis has revealed that the Aztecs were growing a much wider variety of crops than previously thought, including plants that weren't native to the Valley of Mexico. This suggests that the chinampa system was part of a broader network of agricultural exchange that brought crops from throughout Mesoamerica to the floating gardens of Lake Texcoco. The presence of these exotic crops raises questions about how the Aztecs managed to grow plants that weren't adapted to the local climate. Some of the archaeological evidence suggests that they created artificial microclimates within the chinampa system, using techniques that we're still trying to understand. There are indications that they may have used reflective surfaces to increase light levels, created windbreaks to protect delicate plants, and even developed primitive greenhouse-like structures to extend growing seasons. The mystery of how these gardens actually functioned is complicated by the fact that many of the techniques used by the Aztecs were based on knowledge that was never written down. The Spanish conquest interrupted the transmission of this knowledge, and many of the secrets of chinampa agriculture died with the farmers who practiced it. Modern attempts to recreate these techniques have met with limited success, suggesting that the Aztecs possessed knowledge that we've lost. One of the most intriguing aspects of the archaeological evidence involves the discovery of what appear to be experimental plots within the chinampa system. These are small, isolated areas where different construction techniques were used, different crops were grown, or different water management systems were implemented. This suggests that the Aztecs were constantly innovating, testing new ideas, and refining their techniques based on empirical observation. The integration of the chinampa system with other aspects of Aztec civilization is revealed through archaeological evidence of specialized workshops and processing facilities associated with the floating gardens. These weren't just agricultural sites. They were industrial complexes that produced everything from food to medicines to raw materials for construction and crafts. The discovery of obsidian tools, ceramic vessels, and other artifacts within the chinampa zones suggests that these areas were bustling centers of economic activity. The environmental impact of the chinampa system is another area where archaeological evidence has revealed surprises. Analysis of ancient pollen and sediment cores shows that the floating gardens created artificial wetlands that supported diverse ecosystems. The archaeological record indicates that these systems actually increased biodiversity in the lake, creating habitats for fish, birds, and aquatic plants that wouldn't have existed in the natural environment. The mystery of how the Aztecs managed to maintain soil fertility in the chinampa system has been partially solved through archaeological chemistry. Evidence suggests that they used a sophisticated system of crop rotation, composting, and natural fertilizers that maintained soil productivity over centuries. The discovery of specialized composting areas and what appear to be fertilizer storage facilities indicates that soil management was a central concern of the chinampa farmers. The decline and abandonment of the chinampa system is itself a mystery that archaeology is helping to solve. The Spanish conquest certainly disrupted the system, but evidence suggests that some floating gardens continued to operate well into the colonial period. The final abandonment of the system seems to have been a gradual process related to changes in the lake's hydrology, urban expansion, and the introduction of European agricultural techniques. Modern attempts to understand and recreate chinampa agriculture have revealed just how sophisticated these systems were. Contemporary researchers working in the surviving chinampa areas of Xochimilco have found that even with modern tools and scientific knowledge, it's difficult to achieve the productivity levels that the Aztecs apparently maintained routinely. This suggests that the original farmers possessed knowledge and skills that we're still trying to recover. The archaeological evidence from the Chinampa system has implications that extend far beyond our understanding of Aztec agriculture. These discoveries suggest that pre-Columbian Americans developed sustainable agricultural techniques that were in some ways superior to modern industrial farming. The Chinampa system was productive, environmentally sustainable, and capable of supporting large populations without depleting natural resources. The application of modern remote sensing technology to the study of ancient chinampas has revolutionized our understanding of their extent and complexity. LIDAR, or light detection and ranging technology, has allowed researchers to penetrate through centuries of urban development and sediment to create detailed three-dimensional maps of the ancient lakebed. These maps reveal patterns that were invisible to earlier archaeologists, showing that the Chinampa system was organized according to geometric principles that suggest sophisticated planning and coordination across vast areas. The regular spacing of channels, the consistent orientation of garden plots, and the strategic placement of larger structures all point to a level of centralized planning that challenges our understanding of pre-Columbian administrative capabilities. The discovery of what appear to be experimental zones within the larger Chinampa system has opened new questions about Aztec agricultural research and development. These areas, identified through analysis of soil composition and structural features, show evidence of unusual construction techniques and plant varieties that weren't found in standard agricultural plots. Some of these experimental zones appear to have been failures, with evidence of structural collapse or crop failure, while others show signs of techniques that were later adopted throughout the system. This archaeological evidence suggests that the Aztecs maintained dedicated research facilities where new ideas could be tested before being implemented on a larger scale. The chemical analysis of preserved organic materials from Chinampa sites has revealed surprising information about the sophistication of Aztec soil management. Researchers have found evidence of systematic composting operations on a scale that suggests industrial-level organic waste processing. The presence of specific minerals and trace elements in Chinampa soils indicates that the Aztecs were selectively adding amendments to optimize soil chemistry for different crops. Some soil samples show evidence of what might have been primitive forms of biochar, charcoal that was deliberately incorporated into the soil to improve its fertility and water retention properties, a technique that modern agricultural science is only now beginning to fully appreciate. The mystery of how the Aztecs managed to prevent soil acidification in their floating gardens, a common problem in wetland agriculture, has been partially solved through analysis of shell deposits found within Chinampa structures. The Aztecs appeared to have systematically collected freshwater snail shells and incorporated them into their garden soils as a source of calcium carbonate, which would have neutralized acids and maintained optimal pH levels for crop growth. This represents a sophisticated understanding of soil chemistry that wasn't formally documented in scientific terms until centuries later. The discovery of specialized water filtration systems within the Chinampa network suggests that the Aztecs understood principles of water purification that we typically associate with much more recent technology. Archaeological excavations have uncovered structures that appear to have been designed to slow water flow, allowing sediments to settle out before water reached growing areas. Some of these filtration systems incorporated layers of sand, gravel, and charcoal in arrangements that remarkably similar to modern water treatment designs. The presence of specific aquatic plants in these areas suggests that the Aztecs may have also understood the concept of biofiltration, using living organisms to remove contaminants from water. The architectural remains of structures associated with the Chinampa system reveal unexpected complexity in how these agricultural zones functioned. Foundations of buildings found on larger chinampas show evidence of sophisticated construction techniques that addressed the unique challenges of building on floating or semi-floating platforms. The use of flexible joints, distributed weight loads, and materials chosen for their ability to resist water damage all demonstrate engineering knowledge that was specifically adapted to the aquatic environment. Some of these structures appear to have been multi-story buildings, challenging the assumption that chinampas could only support simple, lightweight construction. The pottery and tool assemblages recovered from chinampa sites provide insights into the daily lives of the farmers who work these gardens. The presence of specialized agricultural tools that show signs of repeated sharpening and repair indicates that farmers invested significant effort in maintaining their equipment. The variety of ceramic vessels found in association with chinampas suggests that these sites weren't just places of production, but also of processing and consumption, with evidence of cooking, storage, and food preparation facilities integrated into the agricultural landscape. The analysis of ancient DNA preserved in chinampa sediments has begun to reveal the full diversity of crops that were grown in these gardens. While historical accounts mention the major staples like maize, beans, and squash, genetic evidence shows that the Aztecs were cultivating dozens of additional species, including many that have since been lost to cultivation. Some of these forgotten crops show genetic characteristics that suggest they were specifically bred for the unique conditions of chinampa agriculture, representing generations of selective breeding that created varieties optimized for growing in aquatic environments. The discovery of ritual objects and offerings within chinampa structures adds a spiritual dimension to our understanding of these agricultural systems. Carefully placed ceramic figurines, small jade objects, and evidence of ceremonial burning suggests that the floating gardens weren't viewed purely as practical economic enterprises, but as sacred spaces, where human activity intersected with divine forces. The patterns in which these ritual objects were distributed across the chinampa landscape suggest that certain locations were considered particularly holy or powerful, perhaps because of their proximity to springs, their exceptional productivity, or their association with important historical events. The evidence for community organization and cooperation revealed through archaeological analysis of chinampa systems is striking. The scale and regularity of the canal networks, the coordination required to maintain water levels across large areas, and the evidence for shared infrastructure all point to sophisticated social structures that could organize collective labor and manage common resources. Archaeological evidence of meeting spaces, communal storage facilities, and what may have been administrative buildings suggests that chinampa communities had formal governance structures that coordinated activities and resolved disputes. The mystery of seasonal adaptation in the chinampa system has been illuminated by analysis of growth rings in preserved wooden stakes and structural elements. These biological records show that the Aztecs carefully timed their construction activities to coincide with specific seasons, taking advantage of water level variations and plant growth cycles to optimize their work. The evidence suggests a deep understanding of the relationship between seasonal changes and agricultural productivity, with different maintenance and construction activities scheduled throughout the year in a carefully choreographed annual cycle. The archaeological evidence for chinampa expansion over time reveals a system that grew organically, responding to population pressure and economic opportunities while maintaining its core structure and principles. Early chinampas tend to be smaller and more irregularly shaped, while later examples show increasingly standardized dimensions and construction techniques. This evolution suggests a learning process where successful practices were identified and systematized over generations, while less effective approaches were gradually abandoned. The discovery of preserved plant remains from chinampa contexts has allowed researchers to reconstruct ancient crop rotations and intercropping patterns. The presence of nitrogen-fixing legumes grown alongside heavy feeders, like maize, demonstrates sophisticated understanding of soil fertility management. Evidence of cover crops, green manures, and companion planting arrangements shows that the Aztecs employed agricultural techniques that modern organic farmers would recognize and respect. The investigation of chinampa abandonment patterns has revealed that the decline of these systems wasn't simply a result of the Spanish conquest, but involved complex environmental and social factors. Some chinampa zones show evidence of increasing salinity that would have made them unsuitable for agriculture, suggesting that environmental changes may have begun affecting the system even before European contact. Other areas show signs of deliberate dismantling and material salvage, indicating that the knowledge of how to deconstruct these systems was as sophisticated as the knowledge of how to build them. The comparative study of chinampa remains from different parts of Lake Ai. Texcoco has revealed regional variations in construction techniques and crop choices that reflect local environmental conditions and cultural preferences. The chinampas of the northern lake, where water was generally fresher, show different structural characteristics than those in the southern areas, where salinity was a greater concern. These regional variations demonstrate that chinampa agriculture wasn't a one-size-fits-all technology, but a flexible approach that could be adapted to local circumstances. The mystery of the sunken gardens continues to yield new discoveries as archaeological techniques improve. Ground-penetrating radar, satellite imagery, and other modern technologies are revealing details about the chinampa system that weren't visible to earlier researchers. Each new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle of how the Aztecs created one of the world's most sophisticated agricultural systems. The implications of these archaeological discoveries extend beyond historical curiosity. As modern agriculture faces challenges related to sustainability, climate change, and food security, the techniques developed by the Aztecs offer potential solutions that are being studied by contemporary researchers. The floating gardens of Lake Texcoco may hold keys to feeding future populations in ways that are both productive and environmentally sustainable. The story of the sunken gardens is ultimately a story about human ingenuity and the loss of knowledge. The Aztecs developed agricultural techniques that were so advanced that we're still trying to understand them. Yet this knowledge was almost completely lost during the Spanish conquest. The archaeological evidence reminds us that innovation and sophistication aren't the exclusive domain of modern civilization, and that ancient peoples often developed solutions to problems that we're still struggling with today. The technological innovations hidden within the chinampa system continue to surprise researchers as new analytical techniques reveal their complexity. Recent studies using isotope analysis have shown that the Aztecs were practicing what we would now call precision agriculture, tailoring soil compositions and water sources to specific crops in ways that maximized both yield and nutritional content. The discovery of trace elements in chinampa soils that match volcanic deposits from distant regions suggests that the Aztecs had developed sophisticated soil transport and mixing techniques that created custom-growing media for different plants. Perhaps most remarkably, the archaeological evidence suggests that the Aztecs developed what may have been the world's first hydroponic systems. In several submerged chinampa sites, researchers have found structures that appear to have been designed to grow plants with their roots, suspended in nutrient-rich water rather than soil. These installations include what seem to be water circulation systems, nutrient distribution networks, and even what might have been primitive pH control mechanisms using naturally occurring minerals. The discovery of specialized seed storage facilities within the Chinampa zones has revealed another layer of sophistication in Aztec agricultural practice. These weren't simple granaries, but climate-controlled storage systems that used natural materials to maintain optimal temperature and humidity levels for different types of seeds. The presence of what appear to be seed treatment areas suggests that the Aztecs were practicing selective breeding and possibly even primitive genetic modification techniques, selecting and enhancing seeds to improve crop performance in the unique conditions of the floating gardens. The integration of aquaculture with agriculture in the Chinampa system represents yet another innovation that modern researchers are still trying to fully understand. Archaeological evidence indicates that the Aztecs weren't just growing plants on their floating gardens. They were also raising fish, ducks, and other aquatic animals in the same systems. This created a closed-loop ecosystem where animal waste provided nutrients for plants, while plant materials fed the animals, creating a sustainable cycle that maximized productivity while minimizing waste. The astronomical alignments discovered in some Chinampa layouts suggest that the Aztecs incorporated celestial observations into their agricultural planning in ways that went far beyond simple seasonal timing. Some floating garden complexes appear to have been oriented to capture optimal sunlight at different times of year, while others seem to have been designed to take advantage of specific wind patterns or water currents that varied with astronomical cycles. The mystery of how the Aztecs managed to create and maintain these complex systems without written technical manuals has led researchers to investigate the social structures that supported Chinampa agriculture. Evidence suggests that the knowledge required to operate these systems was preserved through elaborate apprenticeship programs, ceremonial practices, and oral traditions that encoded technical information in stories, songs, and rituals that could be passed down through generations. As climate change and population growth challenge modern agriculture, the rediscovery of these ancient techniques has taken on new urgency. The Chinampa system represents a model of sustainable intensification that achieved remarkable productivity while actually enhancing rather than degrading the natural environment. The floating gardens created habitat for wildlife, improved water quality, and sequestered carbon in ways that modern industrial agriculture rarely achieves. As researchers continue to explore the mysteries beneath Lake Texcoco, they're uncovering evidence of a civilization that achieved remarkable things through careful observation, systematic experimentation, and the accumulation of knowledge over generations. The floating gardens weren't just a way of growing food, they were a testament to human creativity and the power of sustainable technology to transform both landscapes and lives. The palace gardens of Tenochtitlan. How Aztec nobility lived among floating paradises, while the common chinampas toiled in the muddy waters of Lake Texcoco, maintaining their floating gardens through back-breaking labor and constant vigilance. The Aztec nobility inhabited a very different world, one where the same agricultural technology that sustained the empire was transformed into an expression of power, beauty, and divine connection. The palace gardens of Tenochtitlan represented the pinnacle of Chinampa artistry, where the practical art of growing food on water evolved into something approaching paradise, creating spaces that amazed even the Spanish conquistadors who would ultimately destroy them. The great palace complex of Tenochtitlan, centered around the Huiteocalli, or Great Temple, was surrounded by an intricate network of royal gardens that stretched across multiple artificial islands, connected by elegant causeways and canals. These weren't merely enlarged versions of the working chinampas found throughout the lake. They were sophisticated landscape designs that combined the practical benefits of floating agriculture with the aesthetic and symbolic requirements of imperial power. The royal gardens served multiple purposes. They demonstrated the emperor's control over nature itself, provided luxurious settings for court ceremonies, and created living museums of botanical specimens gathered from across the Aztec Empire. The morning routine of an Aztec noble began not with the harsh realities of agricultural labor, but with a gentle awakening in chambers that opened directly onto terraced gardens where exotic flowers bloomed year-round and the sound of flowing water created a constant, soothing backdrop. The emperor's personal quarters were situated on the highest level of the palace complex, providing panoramic views of the floating gardens that stretched to the horizon, a daily reminder of the empire's agricultural foundation and the ruler's dominion over both land and water. The design of these royal gardens reflected sophisticated principles of landscape architecture that integrated practical functionality with symbolic meaning. The gardens were arranged in a hierarchical pattern that mirrored the social structure of Aztec society, with the most exclusive and exotic plants closest to the emperor's quarters, while more common but still valuable species were arranged in descending order of importance. The pathways through the gardens were designed to create specific experiences for visitors, guiding them through carefully orchestrated sequences of views, scents, and sounds that would culminate in audiences with the emperor himself. The plant collections in the royal gardens were extraordinary by any standard, representing what may have been the world's most comprehensive botanical collections of their time. Tribute payments from conquered territories often included rare plants, seeds, and even entire transplanted gardens that would be incorporated into the royal complex. The emperor maintained teams of specialized gardeners who were skilled not just in the techniques of chinampa agriculture, but in the much more demanding art of cultivating exotic species in artificial environments. The logistics of maintaining these palace gardens required resources and expertise that far exceeded what was needed for ordinary food production. The soil for the royal gardens wasn't just any mud from the lake bed, but carefully prepared mixtures that might include imported earth from sacred sites, composted organic matter from specific sources, and even precious materials like ground jade or obsidian that were believed to have spiritual properties. The water systems serving the palace gardens were equally sophisticated, incorporating multiple sources of fresh water, elaborate filtration systems, and temperature control mechanisms that could create optimal growing conditions for plants from different climatic zones. The royal gardens served as more than just beautiful spaces. They were living libraries where the botanical knowledge of the empire was preserved and studied. The emperor's gardeners were skilled botanists who understood the medicinal properties of plants, the agricultural potential of different species, and the symbolic meanings that different flowers and trees held in Aztec culture. This knowledge was essential for the complex ceremonies and rituals that legitimized imperial power, many of which required specific plants that could only be grown in the controlled environment of the royal gardens. The integration of wildlife into the palace gardens created ecosystems that were both beautiful and functional. The royal gardens included aviaries where exotic birds from throughout Mesoamerica were kept, their colorful plumage adding visual drama to the landscape, while their songs created a constantly changing soundtrack for court life. The water features in the gardens supported populations of fish, turtles, and other aquatic animals that provided both aesthetic pleasure and practical resources for the royal household. The ceremonial functions of the palace gardens were as important as their aesthetic value. Major state ceremonies often took place in garden settings that had been specifically designed to create appropriate backdrops for different types of rituals, the arrangement of plants, the flow of water, and even the positioning of architectural elements were all planned to support the complex choreography of Aztec court ceremonial, creating spaces where the emperor could demonstrate his connection to the gods and his power over the natural world. The daily life of the Aztec nobility was intimately connected to the rhythms of the garden system, but in ways that emphasized pleasure rather than toil. The emperor and his court would often take their meals in garden pavilions where the food being served had been grown in the same floating gardens that provided the setting for the feast. This created a direct connection between the luxury of court life and the agricultural foundation that made it possible, while demonstrating the emperor's ability to transform the basic necessity of food production into an expression of imperial grandeur. The palace gardens also served important social functions, providing venues for the complex networks of relationships that held the empire together. Foreign dignitaries would be received in garden settings chosen to create specific impressions, while members of the nobility would compete for the privilege of holding their own ceremonies in different sections of the royal gardens. The gardens became a stage where the politics of empire were played out against a backdrop of carefully cultivated beauty. The technical challenges of maintaining the palace gardens were enormous, requiring innovations that went far beyond the techniques used in ordinary chinampa agriculture. The royal gardeners developed methods for creating artificial hills and valleys within the flat landscape of the lake, using sophisticated earthworks and water management systems to create varied topographies that could support different types of plants. They also developed techniques for creating year-round growing conditions, using structures that provided protection from wind and weather while maintaining the aquatic foundation that made the gardens possible. The artistic aspects of the palace gardens reflected the highest achievements of Aztec aesthetic culture. The gardens incorporated sculptural elements, decorative stonework, and architectural features that transformed functional agricultural spaces into works of art. The arrangement of plants was governed by principles of color, texture, and seasonal change that created constantly evolving visual experiences throughout the year. The gardens were designed to be appreciated not just as individual spaces, but as integrated compositions that revealed new relationships and meanings as visitors moved through them. The economic foundation of the palace gardens was provided by the tribute system that brought resources from throughout the empire to support the royal household. This included not just the materials needed to build and maintain the gardens, but also the skilled labor required to operate them. The royal gardeners represented one of the most specialized and highly valued occupations in Aztec society, combining practical skills with artistic vision and deep knowledge of the natural world. The educational functions of the palace gardens were equally important, serving as training grounds where young nobles could learn the skills and knowledge they would need to govern effectively. The gardens provided hands-on lessons in agriculture, botany, engineering, and environmental management that were essential for understanding how the empire actually worked. The next generation of Aztec leaders learned about the relationship between power and agricultural productivity by observing and participating in the daily operations of the palace gardens. The integration of the palace gardens with the broader chinampa system of Lake Texcoco created a unified landscape that demonstrated the empire's ability to transform nature on a massive scale. The royal gardens weren't isolated luxury spaces, but integral parts of a comprehensive agricultural system that fed the entire population of Tenochtitlan. The techniques developed for the palace gardens often filtered down to ordinary farmers, while innovations from the working chinampas were adapted and refined for use in the royal complex. The spiritual dimensions of the palace gardens were deeply embedded in Aztec cosmology and religious practice. The gardens were designed to represent the paradise of the gods, creating earthly versions of the mythical realms where the deities resided. The careful selection and arrangement of plants reflected religious symbolism, with different species representing different aspects of the divine realm. The emperor's daily interactions with the gardens were themselves religious acts, demonstrating his role as the earthly representative of the gods and his responsibility for maintaining the cosmic order. The decline of the palace gardens began with the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors, who were initially amazed by their beauty and sophistication, but ultimately saw them as obstacles to the imposition of European agricultural and urban patterns. The destruction of the gardens was both practical and symbolic, representing the replacement of indigenous knowledge and values with European alternatives. The Spanish accounts of the gardens, written as they were being destroyed, provide tantalizing glimpses of what may have been one of the world's most remarkable landscape achievements. The legacy of the palace gardens extended far beyond their physical destruction, influencing European ideas about landscape design, botanical collecting, and the relationship between power and environmental control. The Spanish accounts of the gardens inspired European garden designers for centuries, while the botanical specimens collected from the gardens contributed to the global exchange of plants that would reshape agriculture worldwide. Modern attempts to understand and recreate aspects of the palace gardens have revealed the extraordinary sophistication of Aztec landscape design and horticultural knowledge. Contemporary researchers working with surviving fragments of the chinampas system have found that even with modern tools and scientific knowledge, it's difficult to achieve the level of integration between function and beauty that characterized the royal gardens. The story of the palace gardens ultimately illustrates the potential for human societies to create environments that serve both practical and aesthetic purposes, demonstrating that the relationship between agriculture and beauty, necessity and luxury, doesn't have to be one of conflict, but can be one of mutual enhancement. The Aztec nobility didn't simply consume the products of their empire's agricultural system. They lived within it, creating a model of sustainable luxury that integrated human needs with environmental stewardship. The architectural sophistication of the palace garden structures extended to their integration with water management systems that created spectacular aesthetic effects while serving practical purposes. Artificial waterfalls cascaded from elevated platforms, creating soothing sounds while also aerating water and distributing it to lower garden levels. Reflecting pools were strategically positioned to mirror temple pyramids and sky, creating visual illusions that made the gardens seem larger and more elaborate than their actual dimensions. These water features weren't merely decorative, they were functional elements of a comprehensive hydraulic system that controlled temperature, humidity, and water distribution throughout the garden complex. The selection and arrangement of flowers in the royal gardens reflected complex symbolic systems that communicated political messages and religious meanings to educated observers. Different flowers were associated with specific gods, noble lineages, and seasonal festivals, and their placement within the gardens created a kind of botanical language that conveyed information about current political alliances, upcoming ceremonies, and the emperor's favor or disfavor toward particular groups. The gardens became a living text that initiated courtiers could read, interpreting meanings in the juxtaposition of particular plants, the timing of blooms, and the careful choreography of seasonal displays. The maintenance staff required to operate the palace gardens numbered in the hundreds, creating a complex hierarchy of specialized workers that reflected the broader social structure of the empire. Master gardeners, who had spent decades perfecting their craft, supervised teams of journeymen who handled routine cultivation tasks. Specialized artisans maintained the architectural elements, repaired water systems, and created the elaborate floral arrangements used in ceremonies. A separate staff managed the wildlife populations, caring for exotic birds, maintaining fish stocks, and ensuring that the garden's animal inhabitants remained healthy and properly displayed. This elaborate workforce represented a significant investment of resources that only imperial power could sustain. The seasonal transformations of the palace gardens created a constantly changing environment that marked the passage of time and reinforced the connection between imperial power and natural cycles. Spring brought explosions of color as carefully timed plantings produced coordinated displays of flowers that could cover entire sections of the gardens. Summer emphasized lush green growth and the abundance of fruiting plants, demonstrating the empire's prosperity. Autumn featured the harvest of ceremonial crops and the preparation of gardens for the dry season. Winter, though mild in the Valley of Mexico, brought its own aesthetic of dormancy and anticipation, with evergreen plants and carefully managed water features maintaining visual interest. The nocturnal life of the palace gardens added another dimension to their function and meaning. Evening ceremonies often took place in garden settings illuminated by thousands of torches and oil lamps, creating dramatic shadows and highlighting specific plants or architectural features. The sounds of the gardens changed at night, with different birds and insects becoming active, water sounds seeming louder in the darkness, and the gentle movement of the floating platforms becoming more noticeable. The gardens took on an almost magical quality after dark, transforming familiar daytime spaces into mysterious nocturnal realms that reinforced the emperor's connection to both earthly and supernatural powers. The integration of medicinal plants within the palace gardens created what was essentially a living pharmacy, where the emperor's physicians could access fresh materials for treating ailments and preparing remedies. These weren't scattered plantings, but carefully organized collections where related species were grouped together and labeled according to their properties and uses. The palace gardens maintained varieties of medicinal plants that weren't available anywhere else in the empire. Some brought from distant conquered territories, others carefully preserved from ancient times. This botanical medicine cabinet represented centuries of accumulated knowledge about healing and the therapeutic properties of plants. The role of the palace gardens in diplomatic relations extended beyond simply impressing visitors with displays of wealth and power. The gardens served as neutral ground where delicate negotiations could take place in settings designed to promote calm, reflection, and reasoned discourse. The act of walking through the gardens with the emperor became a significant privilege, an opportunity for private conversation away from the formality of the throne room. Foreign dignitaries were often presented with rare plants from the palace gardens as gifts, creating botanical networks that spread Aztec influence throughout Mesoamerica. The experimental horticulture practiced in the palace gardens pushed the boundaries of what was possible with chinampa technology. Imperial gardeners attempted to grow plants from climates completely different from the Valley of Mexico, creating artificial microclimates through careful use of shade structures, wind breaks, and water temperature manipulation. Some of these experiments failed spectacularly, but others succeeded in establishing populations of exotic species that became sources of pride and wonder. The palace gardens functioned as botanical laboratories where new techniques could be tested before being introduced to the broader agricultural system. The artistic representations of the palace gardens in murals, codices, and other media reveal how these spaces were understood by Aztec society. The gardens appear frequently in depictions of paradise, in scenes of noble leisure, and as backdrops for important historical events. These artistic representations emphasize certain features: the abundance of flowers, the clarity of water, the presence of exotic birds, while sometimes depicting the gardens as more elaborate or extensive than they actually were. The idealized versions of the gardens that appear in Aztec art became as important as the physical gardens themselves, serving as cultural symbols of what a perfect world should look like. The acoustic design of the palace gardens demonstrates sophisticated understanding of how sound behaves in outdoor spaces. The placement of water features, the selection of plants with rustling leaves, and the positioning of aviaries were all carefully calculated to create desired soundscapes. Some areas of the gardens were designed to be quiet, with sound-absorbing plants and architectural features that created zones of silence suitable for meditation or private conversation. Other areas emphasized sound, with echo chambers that amplified the calls of exotic birds or the splash of waterfalls, creating dramatic auditory experiences that complemented visual displays. The relationship between the palace gardens and the broader urban food system of Tenochtitlan reveals interesting complexities about resource allocation and symbolic consumption. While the palace gardens did produce food, their primary function wasn't nutritional but ceremonial and aesthetic. However, the surplus from palace gardens, including fruits, flowers, and specialty crops, was distributed according to elaborate protocols that reinforced social hierarchies and political relationships. Receiving produce from the emperor's own gardens carried symbolic weight that made these gifts valuable far beyond their nutritional or economic worth. The preservation techniques developed to maintain the palace gardens during periods of drought or other environmental stress were remarkably sophisticated. Systems of underground cisterns stored water that could be released during dry periods, maintaining critical plantings when other gardens might fail. Shade structures could be quickly erected to protect delicate plants from excessive sun. The most valuable or rare specimens were kept in portable containers that could be moved to optimal locations as conditions changed. These preservation strategies ensured that the palace gardens could maintain their splendor even when environmental conditions were challenging. The training and education of palace gardeners created an elite class of horticultural experts, whose knowledge was carefully guarded and transmitted only to approved apprentices. Young gardeners might spend years learning the properties and cultivation requirements of just one section of the palace gardens before being entrusted with broader responsibilities. The most accomplished gardeners achieved status comparable to skilled artisans or minor officials, with their expertise recognized through titles, privileges, and ceremonial roles in important rituals. The security measures protecting the palace gardens reflected their value as both economic assets and political symbols. Guards were posted not just to prevent theft, but to protect rare plants from sabotage by political enemies. The botanical knowledge concentrated in the palace gardens made them potential targets for rivals, who might seek to damage the emperor's prestige by destroying unique specimens or interfering with ceremonial plantings. The careful documentation of plant locations and characteristics allowed for rapid detection of any damage or theft, while they restricted access to the garden's limited opportunities for malicious action. The legacy of the palace garden designs influenced European garden architecture in ways that are still visible today. Spanish accounts of the gardens inspired designers who had never seen them to attempt recreations based on second-hand descriptions. Elements of Aztec palace gardens, the integration of water features with plantings, the use of elevated platforms to create varied topographies, the combination of practical and ornamental species, appeared in European gardens centuries after Tenochtitlan fell. The palace gardens became part of a broader exchange of ideas about landscape design that shaped gardening traditions on both sides of the Atlantic. The economic impact of the palace gardens extended throughout the empire through the networks of tribute, trade, and and gift exchange they generated. Rare plants, specialized soils, exotic birds, and the countless other materials needed to maintain the gardens created demand that supported artisans, merchants, and farmers across Mesoamerica. The distribution of palace garden produce and offspring of rare plants created networks of obligation and reciprocity that reinforced political relationships and economic ties. The gardens weren't just beautiful spaces, they were engines of economic activity that generated employment and trade throughout the empire. The palace gardens of Tenochtitlan represented the highest expression of chinampa technology, transforming the practical art of aquatic agriculture into sophisticated landscape design that served multiple functions simultaneously. They demonstrated that human manipulation of nature could create environments that were both useful and beautiful, productive and contemplative, earthly and divine. The gardens were a testament to what could be achieved when wealth, power, and knowledge converged in service of a comprehensive vision. As we face contemporary challenges related to urbanization, food security, and environmental degradation, the palace gardens of Tenochtitlan offer inspiration for thinking about how cities might be designed to integrate agricultural production with urban life in ways that enhance rather than diminish both. The floating gardens of the Aztec nobility remind us that the most sophisticated technologies are often those that work with natural systems rather than against them, creating environments that are both productive and beautiful, practical and transcendent. As we come to the end of our journey through the remarkable world of Aztec floating gardens, we've traveled from the muddy, demanding reality of the chinamperos who built and maintained these agricultural marvels, to the visionary leadership of Tlacaelel, who transformed scattered techniques into the foundation of an empire. Through the ongoing archaeological mysteries that continue to reveal new secrets about these sophisticated systems, and finally to the palace gardens, where the same technologies that fed the masses were transformed into expressions of imperial power and divine connection. The story of the chinampas is ultimately a story about human ingenuity, environmental adaptation, and the power of agriculture to shape entire civilizations. The Aztecs created not just a way of growing food, but a way of living that integrated human needs with natural systems in ways that were both sustainable and productive. Their floating gardens supported one of the largest cities in the world at the time, created artificial ecosystems that enhanced rather than degraded the environment, and demonstrated technologies that we're still trying to fully understand and replicate. The lessons of the floating gardens extend far beyond their historical significance. As we face contemporary challenges related to climate change, food security, and sustainable development, the Aztec example offers both inspiration and practical insights. The chinampas demonstrated that it's possible to create agricultural systems that are both highly productive and environmentally beneficial, that technology and nature can work together rather than in opposition, and that the most sophisticated solutions often emerge from careful observation and deep understanding of natural processes. The legacy of the floating gardens lives on in the surviving chinampas of Xochimilco, where farmers continue to practice modified versions of the techniques developed by their ancestors. These modern practitioners serve as bridges between past and present, preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost while adapting ancient techniques to contemporary realities. Their work reminds us that the wisdom of the past doesn't have to remain in the past, but can continue to evolve and contribute to solutions for the future. Thank you for joining me on this exploration of one of history's most remarkable agricultural achievements. The floating gardens of the Aztecs represent human creativity at its finest, demonstrating what's possible when practical necessity meets innovative thinking and deep environmental understanding. as you drift off to sleep tonight. Perhaps you'll dream of floating islands covered with flowers and crops, of the gentle sound of water lapping against garden edges, and of the countless generations of farmers who mastered the art of growing food on water without sinking into the depths below. Sweet dreams, and until our next historical journey together, may your own gardens, whether floating or firmly planted, flourish and grow.